Right now, there's a story circulating literally everywhere you turn, on blogs, in podcasts, on TikTok, even in academic journals. And the story goes something like this. Women are leaving their partners in record numbers because men just aren't measuring up. Men aren't communicating. Men aren't doing their fair share at home. Men aren't meeting emotional needs. And so women, finally empowered, finally awake, are walking away, stepping toward freedom, happiness, and self-fulfillment. It's a compelling narrative, even inspiring. But there's a catch. It doesn't quite end the way it promises. If walking out the door were the solution, then the women who left should be thriving. They should be glowing. They should be sending heartfelt thank you notes to their divorce lawyers. But here's the part nobody talks about. A large number of women who leave relationships still aren't happy. Not after 6 months, not after a year, not even after 3 years. That lingering dissatisfaction follows them like a shadow, quietly packed along for the journey. Today, we're going to explore why that happens. Not to blame anyone, not to defend anyone, but to examine a truth most people are too uncomfortable to say out loud. What if the problem was never really the man? What if the issue runs deeper, something that leaving a relationship alone can never fix? Let's start by looking at what's really happening. In some countries, women initiate nearly 70% of divorces. They're walking out of long-term relationships. They're leaving marriages that, on paper, seem perfectly normal. No abuse, no cheating, just a persistent sense of dissatisfaction. A feeling that something essential is missing. A sense that this can't be everything life has to offer. The common explanation is simple. Men are failing. Men got complacent. Men stopped putting in effort. Men expect women to work full-time jobs and then come home to handle a second shift of cooking, cleaning, and emotional labor. Meanwhile, the man lounges on the couch, watching TV, scratching himself, contributing almost nothing. According to this story, women finally woke up. They realized they deserved better. They stopped settling. They chose themselves. I've heard this explanation 1,000 times, and yes, there's some truth to it. Some men do slack off. Some men stop trying. Some relationships do become unbalanced. I'm not denying that. But here's where I start to ask the uncomfortable questions. If men are truly the problem, and women leave men, shouldn't the problem be solved? Basic logic. You have a headache. You take an aspirin, your headache disappears. You're in an unsatisfying relationship with a lazy man. You leave, satisfaction should follow. But that's not what happens. What we observe is women leaving relationships, only to find dissatisfaction creeping into other areas of life. Their careers, friendships, mental health, family dynamics, practically everywhere. And at this point, we have to pause and ask, could the diagnosis have been wrong all along? Here's an analogy. Imagine a child acting out in school. The teacher diagnoses ADHD. He can't focus, he's disruptive, he needs medication. Seems straightforward. But then you discover that the same child at home focuses on video games for 6 hours straight, reads books without trouble, behaves calmly with his grandparents. Suddenly, the original diagnosis seems shaky. Because if the problem truly was ADHD, it would appear everywhere, not just in one classroom under one teacher. The same principle applies here. If women's dissatisfaction were caused solely by men or by romantic relationships, then it should appear primarily in those relationships. But it doesn't. Women report lower satisfaction than men in their careers, too. Women also report feeling less satisfied than men in their workplaces. They experience higher levels of anxiety, more frequent depression, and are more likely to use medication for mental health issues. Stress, overwhelm, and burnout are also disproportionately high. Some people argue that this is because women face more oppression across the board, sexism at work, inadequate healthcare, societal expectations that are impossible to meet. And yes, there is some truth to that. But here's a striking data point that challenges the common narrative. Research has shown that in many workplace settings, women actually report lower job satisfaction when working under female managers compared to male managers. Surprising, right? If the problem were men or male-dominated systems, workplaces led by women should be utopias, full of support, understanding, equality, no glass ceilings. Yet the evidence says otherwise. Dissatisfaction continues regardless of who's in charge, which tells us something important. The source of this unhappiness isn't the man at home, nor the man at work. The dissatisfaction originates from somewhere else entirely. Here's my perspective, and it may feel uncomfortable, so bear with me. On average, women may simply experience higher levels of dissatisfaction than men. Not because their lives are objectively worse, not because men have it easier, but due to fundamental differences in how men and women process emotions, form expectations, and evaluate experiences. Think of it like this. Two people sit down to eat the exact same meal at the same restaurant. One leaves delighted. The other feels let down. Same food, same service, same environment. Yet their internal reactions are completely different. Now imagine this pattern multiplied across every aspect of life. Careers, relationships, health, family, friendships. Generally speaking, men tend to have lower expectations. Not because they're less ambitious, but because of socialization. A man takes a job that pays the bills and allows some free time and thinks, this is fine. It works. A woman in the identical role might think, but is this fulfilling my purpose? Am I reaching my potential? Am I making a meaningful impact? The experience is the same externally, but entirely different internally. Psychological research consistently shows that women score higher in neuroticism, a clinical term, not an insult, that describes a tendency to experience negative emotions more frequently and intensely. Anxiety, worry, dissatisfaction, rumination. These aren't moral failings. They are traits on a spectrum, and women, on average, occupy a higher position on that spectrum. Here's where it becomes particularly revealing. If a woman has a natural tendency toward dissatisfaction, and she's in a relationship, her first instinct is to blame the relationship. At work, she blames her job. In a city, she blames the place she lives. The feelings are real, they are strongly experienced, but the explanation is often misplaced. She leaves her relationship, yet the dissatisfaction remains. She changes jobs, and it remains. She moves to a new city, still the same. Then, one night at 2 a.m., lying awake and staring at the ceiling, she wonders why nothing ever seems to work. Why every new opportunity or environment feels just like the last. And nobody warned her this would happen. No one ever warned her that what she was running from wasn't actually in the room in the first place. It was something she carried with her all along, packed neatly into the suitcase of her expectations. Let's talk about expectations, because this is where it really cuts deep. Today, women grow up with a very clear set of promises. They're told they can have it all. They can pursue a career and raise a family. They can be independent and still feel supported. They can find a partner who is their best friend, their therapist, their protector, their equal, their cheerleader, and their intellectual match. He should make them laugh, make them feel safe, push them to grow, give them space, be emotionally present, financially secure, physically attractive, and spiritually aligned. Let's be honest, that's not a partner. That's a fictional character. A fantasy crafted from romantic comedies, Instagram relationship advice, and Build-A-Bear levels of customization. No human being, man or woman, can consistently live up to that checklist. Yet women are taught that if their partner fails to meet every single box, they're settling. And settling is considered the ultimate modern sin. Settling means giving up. Settling means betraying yourself. So they leave, not because their partner was bad, but because he wasn't perfect. Then comes the dating scene. They look for someone who checks all the boxes. And, unsurprisingly, they find more imperfect humans. But now these humans are strangers, carrying their own histories, quirks, and limits. The man who's emotionally present might be financially unstable. The man who's financially secure might be emotionally distant. The man who makes her laugh may not want kids. The man who wants kids may not be attractive. Suddenly, life becomes a carnival of compromises, and without 10 years of shared history, it's even harder to tolerate. Meanwhile, men are raised with different expectations. They're taught, find someone you can live with, build a life together, and don't complain. That's it. The standard ISN, that she must meet every emotional need. It's simply that you can coexist and function as a team. It's a lower bar. And ironically, lower bars often lead to greater satisfaction. Satisfaction is basically reality minus expectations. Modest expectations make reality seem generous. Astronomical expectations almost guarantee disappointment. Here's a twist that shatters conventional thinking. Lesbian couples. 2 women, no men involved. According to the usual narrative, This should be paradise. No toxic masculinity, no imbalance of emotional labor, just two women who understand each other perfectly. But the data tells a different story. Lesbian couples have the highest divorce rates of any relationship type, higher than heterosexual couples, and far higher than gay male couples. Think about that. Two women, no men, highest breakup rate. Two men, no women, lowest breakup rate. The data is screaming a truth most people refuse to hear. The presence of women in a relationship tends to correlate with higher rates of dissolution, not because women are bad, but because women, on average, experience dissatisfaction more intensely, notice it sooner, and act on it decisively. Gay male couples, on the other hand, have the lowest rates of divorce. Two people with lower baseline expectations, greater tolerance, and less tendency to interpret imperfection as betrayal. They don't need the relationship to feel like a spiritual experience every Tuesday. They just need it to work, and it does, because they allow it to work. I'm not saying men are superior. I'm not saying women are broken. I am pointing out a mismatch between how we talk about dissatisfaction in relationships and what is actually driving it. The common story handed to women is, if you're unhappy, he's the problem. Leave, and you'll find happiness elsewhere. And women take that advice. They leave, and what do they find? Not happiness. They find the same dissatisfaction dressed in a new outfit. Here's what that looks like in reality. I've spoken to countless men who went through divorces. And here's the recurring pattern. She says she's unhappy. He asks what's wrong. She can't fully explain it. She just feels that something vital is missing. He tries to fix it. He takes on more chores. He plans thoughtful dates. He reads books on communication. He attends therapy. Nothing seems to help, because he is attempting to solve a problem that doesn't exist where she claims it does. It's like she's pointing out a leaking roof, and he keeps patching the shingles, while the water is actually pouring in from a broken pipe in the basement. No matter how much he patches the roof, the house will still flood, because the diagnosis was wrong from the start. The issue isn't him. It's the gap between her expectations of how life should feel and the reality of how it does. No man, no matter how perfect, can close that gap, because the gap exists inside her. Here's the painful truth. After she leaves, reality sets in. The first year may feel liberating. No compromises, no negotiations. She eats what she wants, sleeps when she wants, lives on her own terms. But eventually, freedom begins to feel hollow. The silence that once seemed peaceful turns oppressive. The independence that once felt empowering now feels isolating. She slowly realizes that the relationship wasn't the prison. The relationship was the furniture. And now she stands in an empty room, wondering why it doesn't feel like home. She starts dating again. But her expectations haven't changed. She still wants the partner who ticks every box. Only now she's older, perhaps with children, and her options have shifted. The men who meet most criteria are often pursuing younger women without baggage. The men who are available for reasons. She's navigating a smaller pond while holding onto bigger expectations. The math doesn't add up. Then comes a moment, maybe on a Tuesday night, maybe on a Saturday. She's scrolling alone through her phone and sees a picture of her ex. He looks happy with someone new. And suddenly, something twists in her chest. It hits her. He wasn't the problem. He was doing his best. She left because his best didn't match the fantasy she imagined, and now someone else is enjoying what she gave up. That's the moment that truly breaks a woman, not the divorce, not the failed dating attempts. It's the realization that she traded something real for something imagined, and the imagined never appeared, while the real moved on. She's standing in the middle of her freedom, and it tastes like ashes. Now, let me clarify before comments explode. I'm not saying women should stay in harmful relationships. I'm not saying women shouldn't have standards. I'm not saying they should lower expectations or accept mistreatment. If a relationship is abusive, leave. If it's genuinely destructive, leave. If you've exhausted all options and it remains toxic, leave. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about women leaving decent relationships, not abusive, not toxic, just imperfect, because they believe something better is waiting. And for most, something better never arrives. What's waiting is the same dissatisfaction they carried before, just without the partner who helped carry the load. Here's what you need to understand. Society has done something cruel to women. It tells them happiness is their birthright, that they should feel fulfilled, passionate, excited, and content all the time. That any negative feeling is a signal that something is wrong and must be fixed. That discomfort is the universe telling them to leave, to change, to chase something else. And so, women spend their lives pursuing a feeling that was never meant to last. Men get a different message. Men are told life is hard, relationships take work, and their job is to endure and provide. It's not glamorous, but it may be more accurate. It sets expectations that reality can meet. A man expects difficulty and finds difficulty. Expectation met. A woman expects fulfillment and finds difficulty. Expectation violated. Same reality, different experience. Here's a useful framework. I call it the weather versus climate distinction. Your day-to-day emotions are the weather. They fluctuate. Some days you feel close to your partner. Some days distant. Some days annoyed. Some days grateful. That's normal. That's weather. The climate, however, is the long-term pattern across years. That's what truly matters. Is the climate generally warm? Do you function well together overall? Do you support each other consistently? If yes, then an occasional cold snap isn't a reason to pack up and move to another country. But too often, women are taught to mistake the weather for the climate. One rough week suddenly becomes proof that the relationship is doomed. One fight transforms into evidence that he doesn't understand her. One spell of feeling disconnected becomes a signal that she's with the wrong person. And so, relationships are ended during storms that might have passed in just a few days if she had waited it out. Men, on the other hand, do the opposite. Men tend to ignore warning signs far too long. They stick around in relationships that are genuinely broken because they fear change. That's a problem of its own, of course, but at least men aren't walking away from solid partnerships because of a bad Tuesday. There is something to be said for having a higher tolerance threshold, even if it occasionally slides into denial. Now, here's the part one really want to emphasize. The cultural messaging aimed at women is relentless. From a young age, girls are told they are princesses destined for Prince Charming. They watch movies where love conquers all, where the right relationship feels magical, where happiness is only one rom-com encounter away. They read articles preaching that they should never settle. Their friends reinforce that they deserve better with every complaint. Instagram delivers carefully curated snapshots of perfect relationships that don't actually exist. And then they enter real-life relationships with real men. Men who burp. Men who forget anniversaries. Men whose sexual desires fluctuate. Sometimes more, sometimes less than hers. Men who get stressed, withdraw, have bad days, or don't want to talk about feelings. Men who, in other words, are human. And for her, that feels like a betrayal, because no one ever explained that normal looks exactly like this. No one told her the one will leave socks on the floor. Meanwhile, men's expectations develop in a completely different environment. Men grow up watching fathers tolerate mothers' moods. They learn that relationships are something you maintain, like a car. You don't abandon a car because it needs an oil change, you do the work. The car isn't supposed to feel magical. It's supposed to get you from point A to point B. That utilitarian approach may not be glamorous, but it often leads to greater long-term stability. So what's the solution? I'm not pretending it's simple, but it begins with honesty. Women need the truth about happiness. Happiness isn't a destination reached by making the right choices. It's a fluctuating state that comes and goes, regardless of external circumstances. Some dissatisfaction is normal, part of being human. Chasing perfect contentment by constantly changing jobs, cities, or partners is a treadmill that never ends. Women need to realize that the gap between expectations and reality isn't caused by their partners. It's caused by a culture that sold them a fantasy. The solution isn't to leave the man who didn't meet the fantasy. The solution is to mourn the fantasy, accept reality, and find meaning in what is actually possible rather than what was promised. Men, on the other hand, need to understand what they're dealing with. When your wife says she's unhappy and can't explain why, it might not be about you at all. It might be an internal process you cannot fix. Your job isn't to transform into a different person. Your job is to remain consistent, present, and stop taking responsibility for feelings that aren't yours. You can support her, but you can't save her from herself. Here's what happens to women who understand this. They stop running. They realize every relationship has problems, every job has frustrations, every city has imperfections. They understand that happiness isn't about chasing perfect circumstances. It's about adjusting their internal responses to imperfect circumstances. They begin gratitude practices. They go to therapy to examine their own patterns. They learn to distinguish between genuine issues and normal human dissatisfaction. Some of them, the wiser ones, return to the men they left. Not because they couldn't survive alone, but because they realized what they once had was actually rare. A man who showed up. A man who tried. A man who, despite flaws, was genuinely committed. They came to realize they were chasing perfection while something genuinely good had been right in front of them all along. And good isn't ordinary, it's rare. It's more than most people ever actually find. But for many women, this realization comes too late, after the divorce is finalized, after he has moved on, after years have passed, and they left living with the understanding that their choice was based on a story culture sold them. They believed that leaving would bring happiness, but it only delivered the same dissatisfaction, now accompanied by more loneliness and fewer resources. I want to end with something crucial. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. I'm not here to trap women in relationships that don't work. What I'm offering is a fuller picture than the one most people are fed. The standard story goes, you're unhappy. He's the problem. Leave, and freedom awaits. The picture I'm presenting is this, you're unhappy. The reason may be far more complex than you realize. Leaving may not fix it. Understand yourself before dismantling your life. Here is a truth many won't admit. A woman who tends toward dissatisfaction in relationships will often experience it elsewhere, too. This pattern follows her until she addresses it. The expectations, the emotional processing, the cultural programming. She will keep seeking external solutions to an internal challenge. She will move from relationship to relationship, job to job, city to city, always hoping the next change will finally bring peace. And it never does, because the search is in the wrong place. True peace isn't found in a new partner. It's found in a renewed relationship with herself, her expectations, her sense of what is enough. I know this isn't as catchy as "leave him, queen. You deserve better." But it may be more accurate. So the next time you hear someone say, women are leaving relationships because men aren't good enough, pause and ask, if men are truly the problem, why are these women still unhappy after they leave? Why does dissatisfaction follow them into careers, friendships, and life in general? Why do lesbian couples, with no men involved, have the highest divorce rates? The answers are uncomfortable, but uncomfortable truths are often the most necessary. To the men watching, don't shoulder blame that isn't yours. Do your best. Be consistent. Be present. But understand, you cannot fix something that isn't about you. Her dissatisfaction may be a puzzle only she can solve. To the women watching, I am not your enemy. I'm pointing out a pattern because I've seen it destroy lives. I've seen women leave good men chasing a feeling that never existed. I've seen them realize their mistake years later, when it's too late to undo. I don't want that for you. I want you to ask the difficult questions before making irreversible choices. That's it for today. If you're navigating a divorce or separation, I have more videos exploring the dynamics of distance, attraction, and what truly works in these situations. In the comments, share your observations. Have you witnessed this pattern? Seen a woman leave a solid relationship chasing something better, only to end up worse? Share the story, not to mock, not to gloat, but because the more people understand this pattern, the fewer lives it will quietly destroy.